Addis Ababa faces another front in Ethiopia's conflict. Just as the war in Tigray is abating, the Amhara region sees increasing violence. The government has declared a 6-month state of emergency following clashes between the military and local Fano militiamen. Will it get worse before it gets better, or is Ethiopia destined for disunity? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Amhara. The efforts of Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to unite various militia into one national force have been thwarted again. After Tigrayans violently rejected his attempts to dissolve its state leadership, the Amhara region is now fighting to protect the sovereignty of its own militia. Amharan forces had worked alongside the federal army in its fight against Tigrayan rebels, but now Fano troops are fighting their previous allies, rejecting any attempts at national integration. It's added yet another layer of complexity to years of tribal tension and conflict across Ethiopia. Here's a closer look.
In 2018, Abiy Ahmed became the third prime minister of Ethiopia. His predecessor had stepped down after prolonged anti-government protests. The young leader was celebrated both at home and abroad for making economic reforms, releasing political prisoners, and lifting restrictions on media. Just months into his term, Abiy signed a peace deal with Eritrea, ending 2 decades of hostilities. Then made peace with the Oromo Liberation Front, ending its decades-long fight for self-determination. A year later, an attempted coup by a rogue state militia against the Amhara regional government killed dozens, including the region's president. And in October, Abiy's peace efforts with Eritrea earned him a Nobel Peace Prize, cementing his global reputation. In June 2020, the assassination of ethnic Oromo singer Hachalu Hundisa sparked protests, which were seen as a reaction to the ethnic group's exclusion from political power. And in November, simmering tension between Tigray's regional administration and the federal government escalated into a full-blown conflict. Abiy ordered a military offensive, accusing the regional forces of attacking a federal army base. Clashes between the country's 2 largest ethnic groups, Oromo and Amhara, killed hundreds in April. And over a year later, gunmen in Oromia killed more than 330 civilians in one of Ethiopia's deadliest attacks in recent memory. Locals said the victims were ethnic Amharas, while the government claimed people from different ethnic groups were among them. In November 2022, the Tigray People's Liberation Front signed a peace deal with the federal government. Both parties agreed to cease hostilities, ending a 2-year conflict that killed thousands, displaced millions, and led to one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Months later, the government ordered the integration of all regional forces into the Central Army or police. The decision triggered violent protests in Amhara. Protesters feared such a move would make them vulnerable to attacks from neighboring regions. And that unrest turned into fierce fighting in August. The military and the local Fano militias have clashed in Amhara, and last week, the parliament declared a state of emergency in the region to prevent what they say was an attempt to topple the federal government.
The illegal militancy in the Amhara National Regional Government is causing humanitarian and material damage. For instance, the killing and suffering of innocent citizens. In general, it has caused a threat to the safety of residents of the region.
Now, this week, the African Union issued a statement calling for an end to the violence and the start of peaceful dialogue. They expressed support for an inter-Ethiopian initiative in pursuit of peace and stability. Dialogue might be difficult, given the Ethiopian government blames the violence on bandits and hooligans.
It is a force of bandits creating a problem by being led with the intention and goal of dismantling the regional government and then going after the federal government.
And this is not just a military issue. The World Health Organization says this conflict has very serious consequences for both the people within Amhara state and the wider region.
WHO is also concerned about the humanitarian situation caused by the recent conflict in the Amhara region of Ethiopia. Almost 2 million people are in need of health assistance. The situation is made more complex by the influx of refugees from the conflict in Sudan.
So to help us better understand these latest developments in Ethiopia's ongoing conflict are, from Toronto, Robel Alemu. He is the Director of Communications at the Amhara Association of America. From Addis Ababa is the Communications Director from Ethiopia Shall Continue, Ledet Muleta. And in Warsaw is Gebrekirstos Gebreselassie, the founder and chief editor of Tghat Media. Thanks all so much for being with us. Robel, let me begin with you and clear up, I guess, a potential misunderstanding. When Fano forces fought with the government against Tigrayan rebels, it was not because the Amhara were necessarily pro-government, but because they had an enemy in common. Is that not correct?
Yes, Andrea. Essentially, the war in northern Ethiopia implicated the Amhara forces because they were fighting in self-defense. They were invaded by several forces, including the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Army. And as you know, this actually lasted for over 2 years, since November 2020. Unfortunately, a lot of crimes were committed, and war crimes included, within the Amhara and Afar regions. So as this was happening, there was this misconception that Amhara has supported Abiy, but that is absolutely unfounded because the Amhara region actually had the largest anti-government protests, including the ones that led to the current round of fighting in the Amhara region. For example, earlier this year, in April 2023, protesters came to the streets and led peaceful civil demonstrations across more than 30 cities and towns in the Amhara region, voicing their discontent with the Abiy regime's policies, including decades of genocide committed against the Amhara people, including in the Oromia region of the country. And so this was just one of the issues. There was also political marginalization, subjugation, arrests of political prisoners. These include opposition figures, journalists, professors, students, and sometimes human rights activists and people who are simply profiled for being Amhara. So the reason for the current fighting, I think, shows that, or the current fighting shows that these forces were not allied to the Abiy regime, and they do not see the Abiy government as a legitimate government. And we can even look back to the Pretoria deal, which ended the war in northern Ethiopia, in which Amharas called for independent representation to promote justice and accountability and to look after their interests because they did not trust the Abiy government to do that for them.
And they were not really included in the Pretoria Agreement, so they seem to feel that they were kind of thrown under the bus in that process by not being really able to participate. So help us understand then how much you think the Fano forces now really represent all Amharan people. Are they united around the cause that the Fano are now going to battle for?
Certainly. The Fano, when we talk about the Fano, it's important to understand these are everyday men and women who have taken up private arms. These are their own private arms, oftentimes very outdated rifles, for the self-defense of their communities. And this is a cultural practice by the Amhara people that dates back many centuries, including from the time of the Second World War, when Ethiopia was actually invaded by fascist Italy. And so the Fano took up arms to defend their homes. And this is what we're seeing currently, as the Abiy regime has waged a genocidal war on the Amhara region. And this is waged on for many months now. But what's interesting is that the Fano are actually seen as the only reliable mechanism to look after the safety and protection of the Amhara people. They do not trust federal forces to do this for them, as over the past 5 to 6 years, the federal forces have not only failed to protect Amharas throughout the country, but have actually been complicit in the human rights violations against them. So the Fano are essentially seen as freedom fighters, not as just your regular type of militia group that is how they're somehow portrayed to be at times.
Let me turn to Gebrekirstos, because the fear, as you know, among Amhara is that without their militia, that Abiy Ahmed is trying to integrate into the national forces, they will be left more vulnerable to attacks by other surrounding forces, mainly Tigrayans. Would they be more vulnerable?
No, they wouldn't. The Amharas have never been really threatened by Tigrayans. I think it's just important to understand what is at the heart of the Amhara discontent. It's not what my colleague here is saying, but it's just the reduction of the Amhara dominance and undisputed dominance in Ethiopia in 1991 and the installment of the federal order that has basically been the central point of Amhara discontent, because that meant that they lost. Well, not lost actually; they still are, but the undisputed dominance that they had before, controlling the entire Ethiopia as they wish, and everyone else doing their bidding, is the central point in this argument. And so, towards regaining that, they have done everything possible they could do. They aligned with the Abiy regime, and they fed it. They supported it because they believe that it is gonna attack Tigray, which they blame at the cause of the installment of federal order in Ethiopia. So their issue is really the configuration of Ethiopia, and not because there is really any grievance. I mean, they have, like any other Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a very horrible country. It's just always crimes, violence in Ethiopia. But the Amhara has a unique demand, and that is the Amhara elite. I mean, in this case, when I say Amhara, to regain the lost influence, the lost power. And now they were supporting until now Abiy Ahmed, and now they feel like they have attained what they wanted in Tigray.
Okay.
This for them.
Right. Robel seems to think they were never supporting Abiy Ahmed, regardless of what the impression from the outside might be, because they did fight against the Tigrayans somewhat together in the 2-year war there. But let me turn to Ledet, because we have the Tigrayans fighting the government. We now have the Amhara fighting the government. Has the federal government under Abiy Ahmed made it worse for Ethiopia, or was there just potential, maybe never a way really, to unite what is such a fractured country?
Thanks, Andrea. I think the Abiy administration is historically the first government that was brought by the power of the people. So our colleague here just said that the Amhara region, did not bring this, but it's less than 2 years ago that Dr. Abiy was elected by Ethiopia. So if you do not like an administration that you voted for, the first and foremost thing is not to start up arms. That's not the way to make any changes in this current administration, because there is a constitutional order. Having said that, I believe that this is a political issue. I don't think the Fano represent the entire region of Amhara, just like TPLF did not represent the entire region of Tigray. So there are elites who are creating propaganda, saying genocide and having other types of grievances to find a way to get into power. And they're using the regular people of Amhara, trying to entice this violence to face off the Ethiopian National Defense Force. No, I don't think the administration is creating anything. This is about power struggle, and Ethiopia has never really had a democratic a leader who has given this much freedom. Independent institutions are being created, and they are viable. They're not totally where they could be, but it's definitely the start. And this is a historical time for Ethiopia. So we're going to have elites from different parts of the world, whether it's Oromo, Amhara, or any other ethnic group, who are trying to fight to gain some power. And in this case, if we're talking about the Amhara region, the elites are using a rhetoric such as we are the owners of this country, we're the owners of Ethiopia, we are going to take back our ancestors' land, and so forth. These are the kind of propaganda that they are portraying,
Okay.
basically offending over 80 ethnicities in Ethiopia and trying to bring back something that's of the past.
Okay.
So no,
Let
this
me
administration is moving Ethiopia
understood.
forward.
Yeah. Let me get Robel's sentiments on that. I mean, is part of the problem here that nobody wants to let go of the history, including Amhara, to make a fresh start that Ledet would argue Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is trying to bring in order to unify one entire nation. But if you can't let go of your history and you're going to continue to remain with old grievances and insist that land be re-given, refought for according to where it was before, there will never be a solution.
Thank you, Andrea. I think in the current discussion, it's important to realize what is happening right now in the Amhara region, and that's a siege imposed by the Abiy regime that's lasted over 4.5 months. And Abiy represents the Oromo Prosperity Party. And so this is a new hegemonic power that has dominated Ethiopia in an ethnic-based role for the last 5 to 6 years now. And so you have deployment of tens of thousands of soldiers, use of tanks, drones, and heavy artillery weapons on civilian targets, which have resulted in thousands of casualties. And we've actually seen in recent weeks door-to-door civilian massacres in major cities in the Amhara region, including Gondar, Bahar Dar, and Shoa Robit. We've seen weaponized rape against young girls and women, property destruction, withholding of supplies from farmers, intentional destruction of cultural heritage sites, including UNESCO sites such as the Fasil Gibbi castles in the Gondar city, and involvement of non-ENDF forces. So you have deployment of also Oromia regional forces. The Tigray People's Liberation Front has seen this as an opportunity to invade in certain areas and collude with the ENDF, and a similar case with the Oromo Liberation Army. And this was on top of mass arrests, as I mentioned before, tens of thousands of people being profiled and abducted from the streets, put in concentration camps, and subjected to torture. And this was on top of ethnic cleansing in Shaggar, and earlier this year, Christian Muslim worshippers being shot. So what Abiy is promoting in Ethiopia is not democracy. There's never been any democracy in the Oromia region. He ran unchallenged. So there was no political opposition. We've seen actually arrests of members of parliament despite their immunity. So this country is once again seeing what it saw under 27 years of dictatorship by the TPLF, by Meles Zenawi. And when we look at why Amharas are fighting, it's a direct result of decades of genocide, subjugation, and political marginalization by consecutive regimes from Abiy's Oromo Prosperity Party, previously the TPLF under Meles, and then the communist Derg before that. So we're talking about decades of oppression, and that's what led to first peaceful demonstrations, and then the fighting when Abiy invaded.
Gebrekirstos, we're hearing this, so many groups actually claiming and have claimed that they are victims of genocide in Ethiopia. The Tigrayans have said it, the Amharans have said it, the Oromo have also said it in the past. I mean, it seems the pattern over decades is to almost pacify one region for another front to open up. And if the key then is trying to bring trust between these various tribes with all these past grievances to be taken into consideration and claims of genocide, can it get better?
It can't. I mean, Ethiopia is simply not a country. That's what people don't understand. Ethiopia is an empire that has always, that has groups that have aligned with each other, always to attack others. What we see now, these two colleagues of you, a couple of months ago, they were colleagues, Now they are, they represent criminal organizations, Fano, and the genocidal Abiy regime that were like, committing genocide. And they have been rewarded for the genocide in Tigray. There is no justice there. And where there is no justice, it breeds injustice somewhere else. So again, this will happen in Amhara. It will move to other regions again, because as people find ways to ally, against former enemies. So no, there isn't, The problem is that, these people now that they are talking here, both of them actually, they were just a couple of months ago very tight allies. They had a coalition called Oromara, that means the Amhara Oromo Alliance, that basically means against the Tigrayans. And now there is the Eritrean, even a foreign country, that's aligned with the Fano. It's not really quite official, but the key reason here is, they are holding Western Tigray, the Amhara Fano, that have always claims of land of neighboring regions. So they have occupied Tigray, they occupied in other Oromia, in Benishangul Gumuz. And so they are always expanding. They have always this tendency to expand, occupy other areas, and then claim them as theirs. To advance this, they have the corridor that connects them with Eritrea. And they don't want, the Pretoria Agreement says that this should be returned to Tigray, and they don't want to lose that. So, they are just fighting over their robbery. These are criminal organizations. The Abiy regime is by no means trying to install democracy, as our colleague says here. It's a genocidal regime that has committed genocide across the country. There's no doubt about that. I agree with the colleague from Toronto on that. It's a criminal organization. But the problem is he was a supporter of that. His organization was a supporter of that a couple of months ago. And now only because they have another plan, to take power, they want to portray it as
Andrea,
something.
if I could please respond.
Very quickly, I need to get back to Ledet. Very, very quickly, Robel, please.
It's just to say, I think there were some unfounded allegations made. As I said, Amharas have been protesting since 2023, 2022, 2021 against the government, going back to 2016. So the Amhara position has actually been consistent, but now what we're seeing is a realignment of the TPLF with the federal army in support of the Abiy regime. So it's very disingenuous to, I think, reflect on the past and basically do some type of revisionist perspective of that.
We're down to our last few minutes. Ledet, I'll come back to you because at present, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed wants still to integrate regional forces into one federal army, believing that could unify the country. I mean, do you think that's a somehow wise long-term strategy? And it's what, just a matter of fighting temporarily before that vision is realized and the whole country can benefit and unify?
Yes, Andrea. According to Article 52 of the Ethiopian Constitution, there's to only be one national defense forces. And that is very important because it's going to be a defense force that is going to have the interest of all Ethiopians. It's not going to have the interest of a particular region. And that's been in the Constitution, and the Prime Minister is upholding that. Having said that, in regards to the organization, in regards to genocide. So every time there's, a genocide being claimed, you have to look back who is claiming genocide, right? And when you look at the leaders behind this organizations or these elites that are claiming genocide in the last 5 years, they have all been trying to take a seat that is basically outside of what's given to them, whether it's in regional or federal point. Right now, the Amharas are, I should say, the Fanos, and I don't know what the political agenda is there because they are in their region, in the Amhara region, killing their own officials, destroying properties, stealing from their own communities. So I don't know how
this is completely false. Can I please respond?
This will not represent, excuse me, this will not represent the people of Amhara. So what is their goal? They did make sure that they said that their goal is to reach the palace, right? You cannot make a change in 2 years, change your votes, and take up arms against the National Defense Force.
Okay, they believe that they're arguing again that they never got the chance to vote properly and that the government took power without.
The Amhara region did. The Amhara region did get a vote, and the Amhara region did vote, and Dr. Abiy was elected to that seat. If you do not like that, though, but you would have to wait for re-election. No, that's not what they're doing.
Very quickly, Robel. I mean, you can respond, but the problem is we're absolutely seeing that there just is no commonality in what you agree as to what the solution could be here. So very quickly, Robel, I want to end with this. We have 45 seconds. You still think the international community can somehow change this equation and help bring peace? How so?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The international community has lots of leverage to pressure the Abiy regime in this situation. And what they can do is pressure him to call for the immediate withdrawal of non-Amhara forces, the unconditional release of political prisoners, and then revisiting the Pretoria deal, which failed to deliver justice for millions of people impacted by the war. And to achieve peace, we need to actually break the cycle of impunity, that we've seen over the last few years in Ethiopia by the Oromo Prosperity Party and previously by the TPLF. And what's clear is that Abiy Ahmed cannot achieve peace and stability in Ethiopia. He does not have the capabilities to lead. He has very narcissistic tendencies. He looks after the interests of his own elites in his cabal. And I think it's very important to understand that the Amhara resistance is first and foremost about self-preservation, and is actually a struggle for democracy and basic human dignity.
Yeah, we're going to have to end it there, Robel, unfortunately. The sad thing is, though, as many investigations have shown, it seems no one is free of guilt in this equation and in this struggle in Ethiopia. You say it's the Prime Minister himself, but there are other factions, all guilty of human rights abuses and fighting. I'm so sorry, Gebrekirstos, we're going to have to leave it there, but we will be revisiting this topic soon in the near future as this develops. So I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X. Do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.